quite a bit in Homeland, you had gotten quite a bit more. And,
I'm always so shocked that we keep getting snow, and it's like, why am I surprised? It's Minnesota.
Yeah.
This is what it does.
Because I know you didn't
I
miss
saw
out
a
on
great
that melting that we had as well.
photograph
So
on
just
the
told me
internet, and
how much
I think it
additional
was on Facebook, and it said Minnesota fishing.
And we could use some
And
rain.
it was a boat
Yeah.
on top of the ice. And I do remember a couple times in the last decade where we've had to use augers on fishing. For sure this year.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're just sitting all that time. It's not like you can just stop whenever you want. I mean, not really, right?
But that's on my bucket list, or it was.
Well, good morning, everyone. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Committee of the Whole work session today, Tuesday, April 19th. And the first thing we want to do is look at our agenda. We have our minutes from our March 15th meeting there. And then we have a number of presentations today. And we're going to start with our update on our tobacco ordinance. And I'd like to introduce Taylor Blakeman.
Hello, my name is Taylor Blakeman. I work for the American Lung Association, and I'm also partially funded through SHIP. So that's how I'm able to do a lot of the community education around tobacco policy and work with public health partners to offer these kinds of resources to the community. So thank you for having me here today. Is there anything else you wanted to?
So Taylor has a presentation that has been put together by a team of people, and I guess before the presentation we'll go around the table and introduce ourselves. So I worked a little bit with the group. Ann Sullivan, board chair, and also I want to recognize that Molly Hicken, our county attorney, helped us with this as well. Andrea
Forrest. I work for public health, and I'm also covering the SHIP program right now, so I've been active in the tobacco conversation.
Dave Knowles, I'm a Cook County Commissioner, and yep, that's that. Good to see you again.
I'm Stacy Hawkins, Cook County Commissioner. Amy Bell, I'm a community health educator and tobacco grant coordinator at Grand Portage.
John Moran, Grand Portage Tribal Council member.
Jenny Sterling, Cook County Commissioner.
Fox Walson, Cook County Commissioner.
James Yorkin, County Administrator.
All right, well thank you all very much, and Taylor, we'll turn the presentation over to you.
Perfect, thank you. So what I'm really hoping today is to go into the actual ordinance revisions that are being proposed today. But before we got into that, I really wanted to just highlight the sacred or traditional use of tobacco and its significance in comparison to commercial tobacco products. And so I just want to emphasize that commercial tobacco products are really, when you think about cigarettes, cigars, hookah, or any of those products that you see up on the screen there, those are what's really meant by commercial tobacco, and making the distinction between that and traditional or sacred tobacco use and the cultural use there is really important when we're talking about this. And so if it's all right, I'd like to turn it over to John Moran with the Grand Portage community to talk a little bit more about the traditional and sacred use.
Well, there are certain protocols that we have when we give ASEMA tobacco. So Ann gave me some ASEMA today. One of the protocols is whenever you want information from traditional speakers or people that have information to share, that you offer ASEMA to them. And before I start speaking, so I say, Bujugi Nawa, Oma. Hello to everyone here. Can you get your dan to Janakaz? Migisin to what aim. Get you on a gaming. Minawa Mishpia Kang and Shnabi Waking Unjiba. And I just basically said my spirit name, which is Eagle Warrior. And then I come from the Eagle clan. And I'm from Grand Portage. My mother was from Grand Portage, and my father was from another little homeland, I like to call them, Red Cliff over by Bayfield, Wisconsin. So those are my roots of who I am, so that you know when I giving you information and speaking, you know something about me, the roots. So there are certain protocols, but I guess I'll just start with the story when we talk about roots or life in the beginning of things. I'll share a oral history. There are a couple stories that I've heard from elders over the years, but I'll share one with you. There was a time, who knows, hundreds, thousands of years ago, our people were having a hard time. They forgot their connection to spirit, and clans were fighting, families were fighting, and so the elders got together and they had a council, and they decided that they would ask our strongest winged relative, Migizi, the eagle, to go talk to Geshe-Manitou, the creator, and ask for direction again. And so Migizi agreed and called out into the four directions, and on the fourth time, Geshe-Manitou heard Migizi. And when Migizi came back to the people, he brought back cedar, sage, sweet grass, the pipe, upwagan, and asema, tobacco. Now traditionally, tobacco is made out of willow, red willow, bear root, and another little white leaf that I can't remember the English name, I just remember the Ojibwe name. And that's what that was traditional tobacco that we used. And of course, when this country was established in Jamestown in Virginia, there was another seed planted by the colonists, and that was tobacco. That we knew about, but we didn't use it to smoke or inhale into our body, into our lungs, to give us a good feeling. I guess that's why. I've never smoked cigarettes in my life, so I understand a lot of my relatives when they try to quit smoking. Very difficult because of the addiction that nicotine has, and now we have chemicals that are added to what we call commercial tobacco today. So that's kind of the story of how we got tobacco, and those. So we still use it today. We still use the cedar. Cedar can be boiled up to be used if you have a cold. The sage is used for smudging. Now, when we talk about, I'll just tell you another little story. My daughter was about, I think she was almost 5 years old, and one night there was a storm, and it was lightning, it was thundering, and I'd really never heard her say this up till this time, and she said, "I'm scared." And so I said, "Well, what are you afraid of?" She said, "The lightning and the thunder." And I said, you shouldn't be afraid of that, and I'll tell you why. I said, "Someday you're going to go to school," and she was, "Yeah, I'm going to go to school, and you're going to learn science, and you're going to learn that there's a cold front and a warm front, and when they hit together, then they cause a clapping and thunder." And I said, that's one way of understanding nature and the way things are. I said, but we have another way of understanding that kind of scientific phenomenon. I said, everything that the Creator has put here on Mother Earth, or even in the universe, has a spirit. And so it's and I was teaching her the language B'nai Shiwag. These are the thunderbirds, the thunder beings, are the ones that control the natural law here in the natural world on Mother Earth. And so I said, what they're doing is they're doing their job. When the Creator puts spirits here in the natural world, there are spirits under the earth, there are spirits in the water. Everything that the Creator has put here has a spirit. We have a spirit, OG, in us, but everything that's the Creator made has a spirit. The water, the rocks, the animals, the plants, stars, the moon, the sun, everything has a spirit. And what tobacco keeps us grounded is we put that down and pray, and for respect for those spirits, not only for our spirits. So when we smudge, if you ever notice people that have smudged, one of the first things they smudge is their hair. They go like this, and then some people will smudge the rest. Well, see, everything in our body has a spirit. Our eyes, our lungs, our blood, our bones, our muscles. Every organ in our body has a spirit. but our hair has the strongest spirit and is our strongest spiritual power that we have as a human being. So we always notice and what they're doing is they're smudging the spirit of our hair, and they're smudging all of the spirits in our body, and they're offering. So that's the essence. It's a spiritual. Everything is about spirit or spirit, relating to the spirits of the world, because we have a relationship with that. So when I told my name, Ganyua Gichida, that's usually given to a child when they're about 4 years old, but you can get a name at any time in your life. But I got mine when I was about 4 months old. That's the time. 4 is an important number, the 4 directions, 4 stages of life. And so at about 4, a parent will bring their child to an elder who can give names. And then, so I got my name. And then they have a feast. And they invite the community, and the community comes and they now present this child. I was born in Anishinaabe when I came out of my mom, and that's the collective spirit name for us as a people. But we're born with a spirit. As our human body is developing in our mother, our spirit is developing along with the human body. When we come out as Anishinaabe. And so at 4 months old, then our spirit has to have a name. And so Ganyua Gichida, when I introduce myself, all of the spirits of creation know me by that name. They don't know me by John Morin. They only know me by Ganyua Gichida. That's how important a name is. I call it a spirit name. And so so my daughter, I was trying to explain to her, I said, so what we do is because the Thunderbirds are doing their job, they're keeping the natural law, and the natural law would be at the feast, our parents will present us to the community and say, now Ganyua Gichida will follow the natural law. We would teach Ganyua Gichida that the Creator put animals here on earth, and it was put here for us to eat, for clothing, for medicines. And so Ganyua Gichida will be taught when he goes out and takes the life of a deer, that he will put down tobacco and offer tobacco for the spirit of that deer, that he had to take that life, but he honors the spirit of that deer and gives it tobacco. First of all, thanks to Creator for putting the deer here on Mother Earth for us to eat, clothe, and medicines, and then offering tobacco for the spirit of that deer that goes to the spirit world. We call, I think in English they call it heaven. We call it Gagagwe Matazin, and it basically means the place of everlasting life and happiness. That's what we call it. That's where everything, all of our spirits go to that place. And so that's the natural law that tobacco keeps in place for us to understand. So I explained to my daughter, I said, now, you just got to go put out some tobacco for the Thunderbirds and thank them for doing their job. Because what happens of those spirits underneath the earth, sometimes they want to come up into other areas of the natural world, but they're supposed to be in that place. The Creator put them there, so they'll come out. And so when you hear the thunder, that's the Thunderbirds and those spirits arguing, yelling at each other. The Thunderbirds are trying to get those spirits. No, you belong down there. And when those spirits can get obstinate, I guess sometimes, then the Thunderbirds will have to use lightning to try and push those spirits back to where the Creator put them and where they're supposed to stay and exist here in the spirit world. So the next morning, I was up already, and she got up, ran outside. It wasn't raining anymore, so she ran outside. And there were still remnants of tobacco on the ground. And she said, I thought you said the Thunderbirds came and took that tobacco and brought it to the Creator. And I says, they do. She says, well, how come it's still on the ground? I said, they don't take the physical tobacco. They take the spirit of the tobacco, because the Thunderbirds are spirits. So I'm trying to teach her that relationship that tobacco has to spirit. That's what we forgot, our relationship to spirit and all of the spirits of creation. So that's the importance of tobacco. And of course, originally we used to have traditional tobacco, but we don't have time. But there's another history of how our people forgot and ended up now today using other types of tobacco. So I got some, what's it called? Sometimes it's Bugle, and I try and maybe buy the cheapest tobacco sometimes. But that's kind of a couple of stories of the importance of tobacco and how important that is to us as a people. So,
Thank you, John.
Thank you, and also I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come here and share that, because it's so important. And if it's okay with you, I can move on in the presentation,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
just really appreciate you being here and sharing
well, I
that.
appreciate you inviting me, because we're one of the most misunderstood people on earth. And it's good to have a chance to explain things to people that they don't often get a chance to hear from tribal people. So thank you miigwech for inviting me.
So before I really get into the changes in the ordinance, I just wanted to quick talk about why it's important for communities addressing tobacco and really the prevention side of it, and why enforcement is so important. And I think something that we're all pretty aware of is that commercial tobacco use is actually really harmful to people. That doesn't probably come as a surprise to many of us, and we know that it kills over 6,000 Minnesotans a year, and it costs Minnesotans over $3 billion annually in medical costs. And so a lot of what I do is work with communities on different prevention and policy practices, which could include reducing youth access to commercial tobacco, reducing secondhand smoke exposure, increasing access to tobacco treatment, and also addressing commercial tobacco-related disparities that exist. And so one thing that I really wanted to point out or get across today is that tobacco targeting really exists in certain communities and disproportionately harms these communities. So you'll see that in Minnesota, the average adult use of tobacco sits at about 14%, but you'll notice that there's a couple of populations that really sit higher than that, being the African American, Hispanic, Latino, and American Indian populations. And when I think about, John and his discussion about traditional or sacred tobacco, I think about how oftentimes the tobacco industry will try and confuse that messaging, and will try and place maybe luring some of the traditional tobacco messaging onto cigarette packs, and we'll try and say, hey, this is the same thing, this is the same use, but really it's not. They're two different things, and that's how they lure people into addiction, just as an example of that intentional targeting. And another population or other populations that I think of are low income, people with low, maybe some lower education, and mental health or substance use. In fact, people living with mental illness or substance use problems are actually more likely to die from their tobacco use than they are from their substance use or mental health condition in and of itself. So these are the things that I really think about when talking about how these groups are impacted. And then the last thing that I just wanted to point out is that, and I think most of us are aware here too, particularly in this group, but tobacco also targets youth with their advertising. They often use social media, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and many kids are generally using vape products, so e-cigarettes. That's been a really big problem. And so this is another population that we're really thinking about when addressing policy and that enforcement piece is how are we protecting kids from the harms of tobacco use and nicotine addiction. So another piece of what I do, I work with schools in some regards to help implement resources around education, curriculum options, and treatment options as well. And then just as another layer of that, wanting to recognize that unfortunately this disproportionate harm even starts at a young age. Among Minnesota 11th graders, 33% are LGBTQ students, 33% American Indian students, 42% of students face severe economic hardship, and 29% of greater Minnesota students identified as tobacco users in 2019. So this has just so many layers, and I really wanted to highlight this because it's so important in when we're talking about, again, that the tobacco policy prevention and the way that these are being enforced. So just for some context, and again, I feel like this group is more familiar with what Tobacco 21 is, but just as a reminder that Tobacco 21 had kind of an interesting timeline in that many communities in Minnesota had passed Tobacco 21 before the federal or state had done so, and so obviously Cook County was one of those, along with 86 other Minnesota communities that had passed in by November 2019. Shortly after this, federal decided to also raise the minimum legal sales age from 18 to 21. But the problem there was that they really didn't have a lot of guidance for retailers. So in some cases, retailers were still using 18 as their age, or maybe not enforcing as well as they could. And so in March of 2020, Minnesota had passed this in the legislature. And this is why when we were originally having some discussions in Grand Marais as to doing some tobacco work there, and as we were having these conversations, it came up that it might be a really good time to take a look at Cook's tobacco ordinance and just see where we might need to make some changes as far as aligning with state and federal law. So really, I just wanted to highlight there were a lot of things that changed in Tobacco 21 in Minnesota, but as it pertains specifically to the ordinance and the different changes that are needed in there, the three bigger things that changed were the compliance checks. The age changed from 15 to 17 to 17 to 20. And also you'll notice in the old language that there was also 2 sets of compliance checks. And so this is just a singular one that they have in state law. So the second was that there was an increase in fines for retailers. They were raised to $300 for a first offense, $600 for a second offense, and $1,000 for a third. And I want to just point out that this is a state law minimum, and so municipalities that license tobacco retailers should really be enforcing this, again, as the baseline. And if communities want, they can go above that if they wanted to, but going under that would technically be not in compliance with state law. And then the last bigger change was that they require a photo ID to verify the age of anyone under the age of 30. And so, again, these are just really the bigger ones that pertain as we're talking about the ordinance in particular. But if you want to learn more about the other changes, there's also an FAQ by the Public Health Law Center that you can check out and read a little bit more about that. So really the revisions that are being presented today are primarily just to align with the state and federal changes, and also, again, to bring awareness in the community around that sacred or traditional use, because it's just so important that we're making the distinctions and highlighting that within the community. So the language that's in front of you, this was drafted by the Public Health Law Center, or reviewed by the Public Health Law Center. And what's really nice is we work with them a lot because, number one, they're a free resource, which is great, but also they have a lot of attorneys who really specialize in tobacco, and so their language really stands on firm legal ground. It's stood the test of litigation, and they're just a great resource to use, and I really trust them as far as best practices, things like that. So we were able to run this language by the Public Health Law Center, but we've also been working with Molly, who took a look at it and was able to review it as well. So just going into the specific sections, if you look at the purpose statement, these are really minimum changes. You can see that 18 is crossed off and just acknowledging that 21 is now the new age, state and federal law. And there's a little bit on the bottom there about some new data that's been released through the Minnesota Health Department as of 2020. Again, these are really not significant changes, but since we were going through anyways, figured why not update some of these other things in there. And then if you look at the definitions in section 200, this again was a very slight tweak of the language to make it a little bit more clear. So if you look at the second sentence, they're really exempting certain types, the bigger cigars. And so if you look at the old language, it was a little bit more ambiguous, and so the new language and the edits that were made there just make it more clear that what we're talking about are those bigger cigars, and that they're exempted from that loosey language.
And I noticed also that there is not a dollar amount attached to a cigar. That was quite a discussion at one of our recent city council meetings, and so that dollar amount for a cigar has been eliminated.
So then, does that include any cigar then, or, I mean, you're still making a distinction between premium cigars and non-premium cigars, is that correct?
Yeah, in that context, they're specifically referring to premium cigars, so those would be the bigger.
I'm clueless here. Why are premium cigars excluded from?
In this context, they're defining loosies, so single products that are unpackaged, and making sure that they're not available to be sold outside of the package separately. So for instance, with cigarettes, if you had one cigarette, you couldn't just sell it for $1 or sell it for, but with those bigger cigars, I think typically you would find those separate, the more expensive ones. Because a big reason for that is, we don't want there to be a singular cigarette for 50 cents, for instance. But bigger cigars are exempted because they're a lot more expensive. So it's going to be a lot more, what's the word I'm looking, it's not going to be likely that someone's, $14 for one cigar. That's a hefty price. And so it's not going to be as cheap and attainable.
So it's not about prohibiting the tobacco, it's all about the money. That's where I'm looking at that, like, wow, that just struck me as odd, so.
Well, I always looked at it, at this portion of the ordinance or law, that cigarettes were designed and manufactured to be sold in a package. And part of that reasoning is because then they use that as a vehicle for messaging and this type of thing for, warnings, these types of things. Whereas cigars, particularly premium cigars, were not manufactured in that fashion. You can buy them in bundles, but they're often sold as an individual product, and so that was why there was a delineation there. There are many cigars that are actually in manufacturing designed to be sold again in, packaging and this type of thing. So I really think that's the whole purpose of this. Does it come to money? In the end, yes, it does, but it was how it was designed, and part of that was how the messaging for warnings against tobacco use, that type of thing, were being done. And if you separate all that out from the packaging, then you've lost that vehicle to even begin to warn people.
And I think where there might be some confusion is individual cigars are not exempt from the age.
Correct.
It's just from what's considered a loosey.
Right.
Yeah.
Trying to target people that were out on the street selling individual cigarettes or individual small cigars.
That's-
I was just confused.
Well, that was the whole, that was the whole thing. There were people that were actually buying these cigarettes and buying these smaller cigars and going on the street and just hawking them on the street for a specific amount of money. And that was what they were trying to prohibit.
Sorry. Just
No,
need
that's
to
good.
catch up.
Sorry, I've had a lot of coffee this morning, so I'm also,
Sorry.
I'm just sailing through. Yeah, and I want to mention too, just since we're already talking about it, because tobacco is advertised to that low income population, it's like we don't want it to be available to purchase 50-cent cigarettes individually, or that's also a piece of this particular section too. Something that was added to the definition section, section 200, is we really worked, and Amy Bell, tobacco coordinator in Grand Portage, she really worked with us to be able to work with the Grand Portage community in developing a definition that is more tailored to their specific tribal use of tobacco, or of sacred and traditional tobacco. So each tribe technically uses this in different ways, and we really wanted there to be a very specific definition for the community. And so this was added in there just to make it more clear as to how it's used in a more local way that pertains directly to the community. And so, Amy, I'd want to give you space too, if you want to add anything to that.
I think it's pretty complete the way it is, and hearing John talk a little bit to it. Is there anything you want to say?
Well, the use is pretty much a common denominator of all tribes. What difference would be was how they make the tobacco traditionally. Might use different trees or different plants, but pretty much across the board, all tribes. And I've met a lot of tribal people in my life from different tribes, and it's pretty much the same idea of how tobacco is used and why.
I do have a question. So we're talking about the use of tobacco. How is it obtained? Because we're talking about commercial, you go to a store, you buy it. What's the difference here? Is it at Grand Portage, so you have a way of distributing the tobacco, or how does that work?
So through the tobacco grant in Grand Portage, we do grow tobacco and make it in seeds available to community members. So they can, like when there's powwow every year, well, pre-COVID, tobacco that was grown at Grand Portage is provided for the powwow, and seeds are available for community members that want to grow their own.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's obtained within your community at any given time or special occasions?
Well, it can't, obviously, growing wise, we can't grow it in the winter, but,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there are people in the community that grow their own and have it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are people in the community that don't use the locally grown, and will go to the convenience store and buy a package of tobacco and use it in a traditional way, not purchase it to smoke or chew, but that have it on hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just needed that connection.
Yep. Yep. And part of the tobacco grant is encouraging people that are using tobacco for a traditional purpose to use traditionally grown tobacco instead of purchasing a pack of cigarettes and tearing open a cigarette and using it after, which is a way that a lot of people use it, and that's fine. But it's nice to encourage the growing of it and using something that's locally produced.
Are there traditional uses that are inhaled more than versus offering, or no?
No, we use the pipe. You puff on the pipe. You really don't inhale it.
Okay.
Even the commercial tobacco isn't inhaled.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also, just to put it into context to the ordinance, like the purpose of defining it and mentioning it in here too is also to make sure that that it's really, you'll see in the exemption section, 1300 here, that it's really, it's separating itself from that commercial tobacco and making sure that really what the ordinance is doing applies to commercial tobacco products and exempts the traditional or sacred use. So just wanted to connect those two things, even though it's farther down into the ordinance.
Can we go back to that?
Yeah.
And so, how this reads to me is that, I guess it's just so, that first section, I guess, is so important, recognizing the traditional tobacco, because how I think this could be read is that this ordinance shall not prevent a tribal member to go to the gas station and buy bugle, or, I see where that could get confusing interpretations. So I don't know how we avoid that, or if I'm just confused, but I think there could be confusion there. I don't know if that's something that's going to be bumped up against, or if it's even an issue. I'm just trying to.
I'm thinking it could be.
Yeah.
As somebody who used to work in an establishment and had to check IDs and deny people sales, and also having a child who got picked up for tobacco use at Point, I can see that there may be some issues of, I'm doing it for cultural reasons, and I'm not. Just saying that could create some divisions unnecessarily for our community.
Well,
I'm not understanding how this would work.
yeah, I guess I'd also just wonder is, John, do you see this as a potential problem or not?
What's the problem? I'm not quite understanding what the problem is.
Yeah. That's why I don't know
How
that
they
it is
will
a problem.
attain it, how younger people will buy it, or they
Potentially.
can buy it, right?
Yeah, but
I don't-
maybe it's not a problem. That's,
Yeah,
okay.
it's regulated.
So, we, underage, under 21, Indigenous community members, I was reading that as saying they can still buy it, tobacco. Am I wrong?
Traditional or sacred tobacco, yes, but they couldn't purchase, for instance, cigarettes or cigars or the commercialized tobacco products. They still would not be able to purchase. It would only be traditional tobacco that they could purchase underage. And this is something that's exempted in state law too. So this would not be unique to
This
the
isn't
county.
new.
That's
Right,
helpful.
right,
Yeah.
if that helps.
That's helpful me a lot.
Does that help you?
Okay, I'm thinking of when I was working at Holiday and, okay, so a bag of tobacco? Because I'm hearing, you said something about taking cigarettes and unrolling cigarettes. I'm thinking, is that sacred tobacco? I'm just trying to sort this out in my head.
Right.
What is, what isn't? When does it become sacred? I mean, my own faith traditions, some things I would consider sacred or spiritual and somebody else might not. When do we determine
I think that's
which
the
way to
difference.
go?
If it was purchased commercially and you're 13 years old and you're in possession of it, then that is not considered traditional tobacco, correct? Is that the way? Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense. So if you grew tobacco and you had that in your possession, that's different from someone giving you a pack of cigarettes and you disassemble the cigarettes. You know what I mean? For the
Crush it up.
longer. Crush it up, yeah.
I have to process a little bit more, but thank you for taking the time to explain it to
Yeah.
me.
Oh,
I really do
absolutely.
appreciate the discussion.
And, you know, perhaps maybe if, you know, if questions come up later, I'm more than happy to do some more digging too and help.
I think, so maybe is the question like, how will the retailer determine if they're selling it under false pretenses or not? Is
Yeah.
that what you're asking?
Yeah, it personally.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how you would make that determination. Very much.
So, yeah, so the question is, would an underage band member be able to go to a gas station and purchase loose tobacco? Is that kind of what it comes down to?
That's where I was coming from originally. So I was trying to rationalize how this is there.
And so, is that, or is that, does that, under the law, is that possible?
I think that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure about where or what it would look like being sold at a retail location. But I know, for instance, it would be really easy to tell a pack of cigarettes or a vape or like those products would be really obvious.
Yeah,
It'd be
yeah.
like, well, obviously I'm not selling that to,
Right.
I'm not selling that to someone under 21. I think where I understand where you're coming from is maybe the loose tobacco and the distinguish between that. I'd probably have to consult with the public health law center and just see what they say. And even, I think another more local question is where even would it be sold? And
It's available right now at Holiday.
Yeah, well, you can buy a bag of loose tobacco at almost anywhere, like the grocery store and the gas stations.
but traditional tobacco, and what is that? Is that a different?
Right. So the question essentially is, would underage band members be able to go to the gas station or Holiday to purchase a bag of loose tobacco? Because there was reference at some point that is sometimes used by people too, so how would the establishment, I mean, good faith, I don't know, how would the establishment know that they were selling it under the correct pretense of the law or whatever?
I would have to clarify
Yeah.
that.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And, you know, yeah, my priority would be not impeding indigenous rights and spirituality, then of course keeping the youth healthy as well. And so it's just finding that balance. So that's why I was asking about that language in particular.
And I can say from my observation when youth have been present and tobacco has been brought as an offering, I think of Stonebridge sometimes performing in our community, like Earth Day this Friday, up at the school, back when we changed from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, occasions like that. The tobacco has always been provided by an adult. A youth has not brought the tobacco to that situation. It's been provided by an adult. And that's been done just on I can't think of a situation when that hasn't occurred. John, maybe, can you think of any examples? I just can't.
I mean, just adults offering
Yeah.
tobacco for a ceremony or
Yeah,
something
it's
like
the
that.
adults.
Well, youth can offer,
They can.
yeah. If they're taught the
Mhm.
significance of it.
And maybe.
And its use, you know,
Yeah.
specific use for spiritual reasons.
Mhm.
You know, like, it's really a good question about how to, and I didn't know kids could purchase tobacco under the age of 21. That's the first time I didn't know that was part of the law, never read the law. If there would, I think that responsibility should lie with tribes to educate our youth, well, we do, we continue to educate, but have somebody from the community, an elder or something, have something that the person under 21 would have, that they've talked to an elder, and the elder has explained it to them, and they have some, maybe it's a little card that says, oh, yeah, I have permission under 21 to purchase tobacco. I'm not really sure. So I'm surprised that they made that a kind of exemption for young people to buy it. That can get kind of murky.
Well, that's
Is
a
what
hard
you-
question. Yeah, that's a hard
So,
question.
yeah, it's,
Well, it seems like, well, my preference would be to err on the side of the spiritual, you know, like, it seems like a higher priority. But I was just curious about that, how that remains. And we're talking.
So could you flip back to that?
Oops.
Well, okay.
Can it be to any person over the age of 21?
Right, well, that's what I was gonna
Yes.
say, can we just, I mean, if you're purchasing it from a licensed commercial tobacco retailer, I don't imagine any of those establishments sell sacred tobacco, so couldn't the commercial tobacco retailer just be 21?
Say that last part again, I'm sorry.
Could this just say over,
Any person 21 or older.
yeah,
I would think so. I don't see why you couldn't. I can,
We can always enact something that is more stringent than the state law. My
Right.
question would be, would Grand Portage be comfortable with that?
can't talk for
I know you
everybody.
can't speak
I'd be-
for the band, but
Makes
that would
sense to me.
that would
I be
require,
comfortable with it,
yeah, that would require a conversation with the tribal council.
Sure.
To me, it almost, if we put that in there, it almost negates the whole point of the traditional sacred tobacco in the ordinance. So that's where I think it's important to, well, it's important for me to better understand, like clearly a vape is not going to be sacred tobacco, but is loose leaf sacred tobacco from a gas station. I think that's kind of the long and short of it for
Right.
me. I mean, I understand it. Rolled cigarettes can already, pre-rolled cigarettes can already be used, torn apart and used, and are sometimes, but, yeah, that's the long and short for me, but I just, I don't want to put the burden on tribal members to prove that the intended use is for ceremony.
And I'll speak from the retailer end of it. I don't want to put the burden on the retailer that is going to get a fine because they get it wrong.
Sure. And I think how enforcement works is, and I could be way out here, but largely in those checks, right? They bring in the mole and whatever. And so.
Wonderful characterization.
As a person who got checked and
Right?
then got passed, yes.
Well, I don't doubt it, don't you?
But then, of course, because I asked the question. You're right. But then to be told say, no, I'm sorry, I can't sell this, and then be told, no, I'm being discriminatory.
Right, right.
I would,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it needs to
what's
be, it needs
person
to
in
be
a-
clear,
Horrible.
whatever it is, it needs to be clear, we just have to figure out what it is.
Well, and that's why we're here. This is
Right.
a session to discuss and get input and ask good questions so we can develop an appropriate ordinance.
But it shall be an affirmative defense to a violation of this ordinance for a person to have reasonably relied, I don't even, like, my brain can't comprehend that statement right now. What does that actually mean?
So proof of age is saying something about 21.
Right.
That was, I guess when this whole discussion began, I was actually pleased with the addition of this because I think it's very important to recognize traditional sacred tobacco and that we're not talking about that, right, in this ordinance and what we're trying to do. And we're not trying to regulate that. That's for the tribe's use. And so that was why it was important to me. I never, until the conversation began, I never actually looked at it that, someone might misrepresent the intent of this to provide a mechanism for somebody under 21 years of age that was a band member to go into a store and purchase tobacco products. The two were just that separate in my perspective. I think it's a good discussion, and I think that last statement in there, I think, was reinforcing the fact that that wasn't the intent of this. If commercial tobacco products were going to be purchased at an establishment that is regulated in the sale of those, that you still have to meet the requirements of being 21 years of age or older, right, to do that.
Right.
That was how I was actually taking this in. However, the words need to be stated and I think it would be a small change, that you're not exempting, and trying to provide that pathway, for the purchase of them.
Right.
But I see where that's coming from someone that's worked in the retail perspective, that you might have somebody come in and claim, that I'm buying this for, as sacred tobacco, whether that's true or not, right?
yeah, shouldn't be up to me to judge.
But yeah, and it's just sad to me that I don't want to take away the importance of the discussion from the enforcement perspective. When I looked and started this conversation, I was just so pleased that we were actually going to acknowledge the use of and having the traditional sacred tobacco.
So my mind is still spinning around all this because the sacred tobacco on Grand Portage Reservation is either grown or presented at a ceremony, but when you come to a city, is sacred tobacco sold in Grand Marais? That's the question. You've got the commercial and you have the sacred. If there isn't anything here or in any town in Minnesota, then I don't think there's a problem because they aren't going to be buying it. Is that right?
But the question was, and came from the conversation, that some people
Yeah.
will actually buy different commercial tobacco products and use them for those, in that way. That's really where this started to
Yeah.
kind of cross over. No, the sacred tobacco isn't sold commercially in these ways, but others that are going to use it in that fashion, commercial in that fashion, well, if you choose to do it in that way, you will need to meet the ordinance requirements. The person that is purchasing would need to be 21 years of age or older to be able to purchase those and then go to use it in that fashion. I think is where
I think, yeah.
we're trying to land on this, and then make the words, make that clear so that any retailer doesn't get confused on a check or a mobile.
So is there some way you can reformulate this and get back to us then?
Yeah, I think I can help clarify some of these questions and really get at what we're trying to say here, so.
Yeah.
Right.
I still don't know what that last sentence actually means, though. Like, what is it telling me? Is it telling me?
I think I know what it means, but at this point in the discussion, I think it's just best to clarify it, so I'm just.
Okay.
I'm just gonna.
Otherwise we'll be stuck.
I'm gonna read it like 30 more times today.
So, moving on to section 900, compliance checks and inspections. The way that it was written is that it was really long, and it also required 2 compliance checks at the time, because this was before state and federal had passed, and so we were, I think it was encouraged to have more than one, just because it was newer, and to really see what products are being sold to the 2 age categories. But in the updated version, or the proposed language that we have here, is it would just update to state law. There would just be the 1 compliance check, and it would be from the ages of, between the ages of 17 and 21. Are there any questions or clarifications with that?
Does that seem like it would make it easier on the sheriff's department?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Because that's sort of been the conversation that I've had with Pat, was that, you know, their capacity to do the compliance checks has been pretty limited.
Yeah.
Do we have information on our compliance checks since the tobacco ordinance was instituted? How many fines and how many?
I don't have the total numbers, but I know that when the city brought it up, that Pat had some data, so we can talk with Sheriff Allison about gathering that.
Any other questions, compliance checks? Okay. Oops, going the wrong way. And then retailer fines, like I mentioned, section 1200 here, these are just increasing the fines to match state law. And so again, municipalities should be enforcing these minimally, and then if they wanted to go higher than this, you certainly could. I think these are pretty good as far as like numbers for retailers, but again, this is just really aligning with what state law has. And so is there any questions about this section in particular?
Just glad to be in alignment.
And so the last thing I just wanted to share is that there are these other resources in case you want to read more about it, if you want a more in-depth comprehension of the state law changes. I also have some more information on traditional tobacco through the Minnesota Health Department. There's some trainings that are free for retailers called Stop Sales to Minors, which can really help with the compliance checks and just making sure that retailers are passing those. And then I'm not sure if this is being streamed live, but I thought if there is any of the public watching, there's 2 quit lines, one being the adult quit line, and there's another youth quit line that's available for the public too. So other than that, here is my information. I'm definitely going to look back at the traditional tobacco and exemption piece, but if there's anything else that I can help with, I'm happy to do that too.
Well, thank you very
The very
much.
first one you had up there, the very first one where it had across the different races of people. Could you go that up again?
Yeah.
What does that 59% represent?
That was 2013, so actually that's come down.
So it's, oh, that's good to hear.
Which is great. It's still really high.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, that's a
There's a lot of
huge
good
disparity.
education going on now, so our
Yeah.
kids are hopefully listening and learning.
Yeah, I'm really curious about just the kind of education that is provided in Grand Portage, like at what, you were saying
We
your
talk
daughter.
about at Oshki and.
Yeah, at 5 years old, even, you were
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
teaching, yeah, it's important, and it's up to the parents.
Okay, that's nice.
If they know, a lot of our parents, because of history and what happened, there's assimilation policies and all these types of things, to get us to forget that relationship and understanding. So we got still a lot of work to do.
And I know Amy has an opportunity to do education through her position, probably working with Eric Reddix over at Oshki, and so there is a lot of education that occurs, and then of course at ISD 166 as well. Any other questions for Taylor or comments?
Thank you for the discussion.
It's been very valuable. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone on the team for coming, and John, we appreciate you helping to educate all of us.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll take a short break so we can get set up for our next group, maybe a 5-minute.
And Madam Chair, so Brady actually needs to get to a conference. He needs to be up by 12:30. So he's stepped out at the moment, but I'd like to, I don't want to go through your presentation.
Thank you.
also.
Thank you.
But I want to make sure that Brady's able to move the time that he needs to. So,
All right. We'll have a few minutes to chat. Perfect.
Okay, what page do you want to have this?
Yep.
So then do you think, so we'll clarify that, correct that language, and then
I'll
just,
also be one that will be in
Yep.
yeah.
I don't want to get like we in the weeds.
So I'll send you all the updated information.
And John has a copy of the PowerPoint.
Yeah, and the ordinance, I mean, effectively, doesn't change the age limit, does change the fine structure, on enforcement. On the enforcement piece, though, what is significant before, basically, it said anybody 30 years or under should be carded, right? So that was a heck of a burden
Yes,
to put on them.
yeah.
So when I got checked, it was not by our sheriff's department, it was by the holiday station stores.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a big program there
Oh, I didn't know that.
to make sure that their employees
Yeah.
are following. And then we got little,
Well, it
a
reinforces.
little green card that you got to put in and maybe win your $500 or
Yeah.
whatever, because you passed your test.
Were you suspicious, or was you just your just standard procedure?
It was just, young kid comes up, I'm going to pack of whatever, and I'm like, okay, fine, give your IDs, and they turned and walked away, and I said, wait, and then the person, obviously the adult behind that was watching, came up and says, hands me this, and it was my first time, I'm like, what did I do? No, it's a card that says you passed, I'm
You
like,
win.
oh, okay.
At least they didn't send that 18-year-old that has a full beard.
Well, and actually, after I got, there's people, because you're at holiday, you were supposed to card anybody that's a 40-year-old. And that age do not like getting carded for cigarettes.
I love getting carded. I always thank people when I've gotten carded. Can I give you a tip?
It's linked in the presentation, so
Is
we
it?
don't want to have to log you and print it that way.
Is it?
I always, whenever I buy booze, I just always.
That one there?
If I'm at the bar, if I'm at the liquor store, just always, but that was as a bartender,
Well,
I
they
mean,
don't even ask me anymore. It's gone.
Well, and I guess here most.
You'll always remember the last time you were carded.
I do not.
Oh, really?
That's how long ago.
I still remember, I was turkey hunting in southeastern Minnesota, and I got carded, and I thanked that young man. Oh. Long time ago.
Let's see here.
James, I think it should be fine to get through our content in half an hour.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for that.
All right.
Well, content is one thing, but then discussion is another.
Yeah, you think you have control over that discussion?
Yeah, ours went a little longer than I thought, so.
I think we've proven that isn't always true. And it has no bearing on you, it's just how we,
Just how we
It's
operate.
not-
how we
not you, it's
operate,
us.
how we take it in.
Yeah, isn't this for me asking questions and learning things? Really?
What's that?
Isn't this format to
Yeah,
ask my
absolutely,
questions?
absolutely.
Well, that's why we're here.
Exactly, yeah.
We all have questions.
So Brady wants to be next?
Well, Allison's going to go.
Oh.
Yeah.
Brady does want to be next, but.
Yeah.
But we're not.
But he- Yeah, you see how it is?
Brady doesn't always get what he wants.
All right, well, welcome back, everyone. We're ready to have Allison share with us a presentation on her proposed reorganization of PHHS Children and Family Service and Behavioral Health Units.
And I am just going to stall us for a few minutes while we wait for my colleague Grace to return.
All
She's
right.
going to back me up here on the presentation.
Not Brady's back. Yeah,
And
that's
Brady's
awkward.
All right, here we go.
It's just following the ordinance.
All right. Well, we'll start out with just reviewing our agenda and goals for our presentation this morning. Grace and I will introduce ourselves, even though we know most of you, there might be people tuning in that don't know who we are and our roles with the department. We'll give a brief overview of Mental Health Authority, what's our statutory responsibility as a county as it relates to publicly funded behavioral health services. Share that service matrix that went out in the agenda materials and explain a little bit more about the goal of that tool as it relates to our discussion around mental health services and gaps. Take a look at the current and proposed PHHS organizational charts, caseload trends, a budget estimate, timeline, and have time for questions. And we will get through this, Brady, I promise, before you need to. Introducing myself, Allison, Mcintyre, Public Health and Human Services Director. I'll be covering most of the content here today, but have Grace here as well to lend her experience and expertise. Grace, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Grace Bouchard, supervisor for the Children and Families team. And I think sometimes people often wonder, why is mental health in with child services, child protection, and that kind of thing. And two reasons. First of all, we often see children who are have neglect or maltreatment struggles, where there's chemical dependency and behavioral health struggles with parents. So those two things tend to go together. But also from a funding stream, targeted case management is a specific drawdown funding stream that children's child welfare also draws down from, and behavioral health draws down from. So there's similar kinds of funding streams, so that's why we compartmentalize them together.
In addition to Grace's role overseeing mental health within the PHHS department over the last almost 15 years now, Grace also serves on our regional Arrowhead Behavioral Health Initiative, which is the regional service delivery collaborative for mental health services in Cook County, so brings that valuable regional perspective as well. All right. So what is Cook County's role in assuring availability of mental health services? In Minnesota, The publicly funded and provided mental health system responsibilities are defined in both the Comprehensive Adult Mental Health Act and Children's Mental Health Act. I won't read this word for word, but essentially the county board in each county is responsible for using available resources to develop and coordinate a system of locally available services. In Minnesota, mental health initiatives are regional collaboratives, as I mentioned, charged with overseeing mental health services and funds to counties and tribal governments in their area. In our region, we are a part of the Arrowhead Behavioral Health Initiative, which includes Minnesota counties and Lake Superior Chippewa bands of Boys Fort, Carlton, Cook, Fond du Lac, Grand Portage, Itasca, Couchiching Lake, and St. Louis. So this is a graphic from the Department of Human Services that illustrates the gaps in mental health care across the state. This is from a 2015 needs assessment. So in Cook County, we are among the counties statewide that have the most unmet needs. This graph or the data set has since been updated. I put a link to the updated data set in the presentation, which you'll all have access to after our presentation. But a few notes on that is that it is not accurate in terms of what is available here. It lists two providers of mental health services who may be licensed to provide services in Cook County but aren't currently providing services. So it lists one crisis responder and two ARMS providers. ARMS is the Adult Rehabilitative Mental Health Services, and neither HDC nor Ascend, who were previously licensed to provide services in Cook County, are currently providing services.
This is my favorite slide, well, one of my favorite slides, and I think the last sentence, as a result, people often travel long distances or receive an inappropriate level of care, really sums up the struggles that we have. I mean, the risk that provides on our service providers is that they might be providing services that they aren't qualified to provide because of the pressure they feel and the immediacy they feel. So I think it's really important to think about that in terms of risk for our staff and for the client, people receiving services as well.
Another thing that I like about this graphic and why I chose to include it, even though the data set is not accurate or complete, I also want to point out that among the tribal nations, Grand Portage is even listed here, which is concerning. That in addition to the illustration of how we relate to other areas of the state is that it shows mental health exists along a continuum of care, from health promotion and prevention, the type of work that our public health team members are more deeply engaged in when they aren't in full pandemic response mode, all the way to inpatient and residential services on the far end of that continuum, that Minnesotans rely on access to care across that continuum. So as it relates to the continuum of care, I keep forgetting that I am in control of both of these here. April, I'll ask you to click on the link to the PDF so that I have more for that. I don't know how I can actually control that from here, but so that you can see a better visual of that. And you all have this in your meeting materials. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this line by line and discussing the level of services, but mostly want to introduce the purpose of why we created this tool, what it is we're trying to convey. You've heard us say in the past quite a bit that in the past, HDC provided a wide range of mental health services in Cook County, HDC being the Human Development Center. Services included therapy provided by a licensed professional and therapeutic skills provided by mental health practitioners, people with often bachelor level degrees. With the departure of HDC in 2018, this left a major gap in services locally. Staffing was a challenge for HDC leading up as they weren't able to consistently have the level of staff to provide those services. Over the last several years, PHHS and others in Cook County and Grand Portage have worked to address the gaps in behavioral health care. Sawtooth Mountain Clinic expanded their behavioral health services, moving from a primarily integrated model of behavioral health care in the exam room to an outpatient therapy model, adding additional therapists to their team. Ascend Services, a for-profit agency, moved into the community and was able to temporarily fill some of those gaps in skills-based services. Ascend was also a recipient of the SchoolLink Mental Health Grant, which improved access and provided funding to support school-based mental health services. But both Ascend's primary providers resigned in 2021, and they have yet to really rebuild that level of services in Cook County since then. So the goal with this matrix is just to provide a snapshot of mental health services that are funded through the Department of Human Services, through our grants that we receive from the state, or billable to publicly funded health plans. The goal of this tool is also to provide a snapshot of where we are in our efforts to address the gaps in behavioral health services locally. Oops, here.
No, we got it.
So in this first column here, can I laser with this?
It's not working on that.
All right, that's okay. In the first column, that illustrates when HDC was fully staffed and operating in Cook County. Is in that first column. The second column over illustrates the changes following the closure of HDC, where we're at currently with availability of services. I should also note green, yes, means that service is fully available. Green with kind of those hash marks indicates that the service is available, or the staff are available to provide the service, but we don't have, at least within the department, the capacity to bill for those services yet. Orange is partially available and red is not available. These are organized from lower intensity at the top to higher intensity at the bottom, with intensity of intervention referring to the amount of resources, so the staff time, the funding, the frequency of services, etc. On the far end of the high intensity spectrum, we would not expect to be able to offer those services locally here in Cook County, like residential treatment. We don't have the demand or the capacity. There are many, many barriers that we would face in having those services available, but they are a part of that continuum of care, and we rely on having those available in state service hubs. Another note on this matrix is that in the far column, there's more information about what partial availability means and whether or not those services are eligible for reimbursement through the Department of Human Services. I'm just going to keep going, and if we have questions and want to come back and dig into the matrix in any more detail, I'll do that. So this is our current organizational chart. We saw this morning in the presentation from Lori. As you can see, we have two primary human services divisions currently, one being the Adult and Home and Community-Based Services team, and the other being the Children and Family Services team, which includes intake, licensing, family services, which is all inclusive of child welfare, child protection, and other voluntary supports for families at risk of child maltreatment. And then we have our behavioral health team as well under that division currently, with substance use disorder and co-occurring disorders case management, adult mental health, children's mental health, and children's therapeutic supports. We are actively recruiting for the addition of a mental health worker to provide those therapeutic supports to adults, and the mental health crisis response pilot. Currently, we contract with Sawtooth Mountain Clinic to provide clinical supervision to our mental health staff. This is required in order to bill for targeted case management. And our social workers meet on a monthly basis with the clinicians of the clinic to receive that clinical supervision. We're in development with the Human Development Center as well as an independent practitioner to provide both the programmatic and clinical supervision of these two new mental health staff, as the clinicians at Sawtooth don't have the capacity to really expand beyond what they're currently providing to our team. Nor do they really have that expertise in the program area around skills services. They offer definitely the clinical expertise, but don't have that familiarity of how skills and crisis services are provided that we can achieve with HDC. So So Grace in her role currently oversees 7 staff, and with the addition of the 2, that would be 9 under her supervision across a very broad range of services. So our proposal in reorganizing the department and adding an additional position is to add the behavioral health team supervisor. This will shift the expense from contracted services for clinical supervision with Sawtooth to an internal staffing cost. You can see up here in red, clinical supervision, over here, bringing that internally for both the clinical and the day-to-day supervision of the team. While this will result in a greater expense in having the position in-house than contracting with the clinic, it does create opportunities for staff, service development, and additional relationship building across agencies and systems that provide behavioral health support. The clinical supervisor will also have, or we would recruit someone with a licensure in order to conduct diagnostic assessments, which are a foundation for mental health services. The diagnostic assessment determines an individual's diagnosis and drives the treatment goals, plans, and services needed by the child or adult. It also plays an essential part in determining medical necessity and eligibility for services that are both developmentally and culturally appropriate. The teams would still be highly integrated, as you heard from Grace. There's a lot of overlap with children's mental health and child welfare, adult mental health, and substance use disorder. Similar to when the teams were reorganized back in 2015, we at one point had one social work team that included adult and children and family services. We broke those apart and created 2 separate teams, a children and family services team, and adult and home and community services based team, again in 2015, and this was really in response to changes that were happening at a state and federal level, significant changes and reforms in the child welfare world, and the addition of MinChoices as a new assessment tool for determining eligibility for long-term services and supports. So again, at the county level, we need to be responsive and have the programmatic and administrative capacity to prepare and respond to these changes that are happening at a state level. I'll give more detail on this once I get into the budget section, but we did see a significant return to fund balance last year that will allow us to add this position in 2022 and 2023 with no impact on the levy. So how does this relate to what's happening at a state and national level? None of this is happening in a silo or in a vacuum. There's a lot of energy and attention specifically on children's mental health, both regionally with the recent Children's Mental Health Summit. I put a link in here so that you can find more information on the Mental Health Summit. More than 700 people participated in the statewide summit that was also hosted earlier this year. And regionally, I think it was closer to, do you remember, Grace? I don't know, to put you on the spot.
150 or so.
150, yeah, thank you, Commissioner. It was a large group of people across multiple sectors.
Oh, for the regional, yeah, I think it was regional. Commissioner knows this right, about 150.
Other changes on the horizon, adult mental health initiative reform. Commissioner Mills alluded to this in his report this morning from the Arrowhead Health Alliance. This could mean some significant changes to how mental health services are funded. None of that will be happening until 2025. All of this is happening within the context of unprecedented state budget surplus and attention on mental health needs. The CDC just released a report on the youth mental health crisis with national data that more than 1 in 3 high school students experienced poor mental health during the pandemic. There's a link to that full report if you're interested in learning more. This is a review from this morning showing the increase in mental health services and clients in work groups. Overall increase from 52 work groups across children's and adult mental health in 2017 to 76 in 2021. And what is a work group? That's the name of the DHS lingo that we use for a case or a family or an individual who's receiving services.
Yeah, our electronic records are opened up under the person requesting the services, but we provide services as a family unit. So perhaps one person's identified in the work group, but there may be more people in the family, and they all need different things because it's a systemic thing. So I've shared that before. A work group is just hard to determine how many people you're serving.
Here's another way to look at that information broken down by service type. This includes both assessments and work groups, which I would argue is a more accurate reflection of the work, because not every person that we work with on an intake or in conducting an initial assessment becomes a work group, but that's still a significant amount of resources to meet with that individual or family. So again, significant increase over the 5-year period. 2022, this is the first quarter, we're already at 84 across all program areas. Another important note where we've really developed services, as you can see in the numbers here, is around substance use disorder and co-occurring disorders. That's a more recent resource for our department.
It's interesting seeing the total before the pandemic even had a significant increase.
A lot of staffing changes occurring within these years as well that contributed to these figures. Oops. So what is the current overtime and call-out pay impact? It's significant. In 2021, we had 162 hours of overtime and call-out within adult and children's mental health. That's about $5,000 paid out to staff. For quarter 1 year to date, we're at 60 hours and $2,000 paid out in overtime and call-out. This does not include our supervisor, who also has call-out hours. Would be difficult to distinguish what was child welfare, what was mental health related, so I just used the staff hours.
Do you track that, Grace?
I do. I entered into the work group, so it's hard to determine. Again, it's hard to pull out who it all adds into one work group. So a lot of the calls I get are based on existing families that we're already working with. But Martina and I are the primary point people to get any after-hour calls. So as supervisors, we get a lot of weekend calls.
And we're working on a policy around that to have clear guidance for staff. So the budget estimate, I had Lori run the numbers for what it would look like to bring someone on in this role. This would be very ambitious, that we would bring someone on as soon as July. Catch myself up here. But for July to December of 2022, that would be a $51,000 expense for the department. For 2023, estimate, again based at a grade 200, which is the highest grade of our social services supervisors, and we think likely appropriate given the fact that this person would need licensure to provide the clinical supervision, that would be around $100,000 expense for the full year. This includes family health insurance at the 2023 rate. As you heard from Lori this morning, we had a significant return to fund balance again this last year, so we would be able to support this position at least for the next year with no levy impact. We would also see a reduction in contract expense with Sawtooth Clinic for clinical supervision. We'd have the revenue opportunities associated with billing for the diagnostic assessments, which would open up funding streams through the Department of Human Services for ARMS, skills-based services to adults, as well as the children's therapeutic services and supports. Again, with having a clinical supervisor in-house, that's really a key component for registering with the state to be certified to bill for these services.
There's an efficiency component too. If somebody in-house can sign off on somebody or no knows more about a diagnostic assessment, they can indicate, they'll have more information so they can indicate whether or not medical necessity is met, and then they can start billing for targeted case management earlier. So if that's just 2 or 3 people, I guess 2 kids, 2 adults per month, that allows us to draw down a couple of $1,000s. Whereas if you have to wait a month and a half or 2 months to have the diagnostic assessment, and they don't get indicated as medical necessity because that's just the person's statements, they don't do collaterals and such. You just have a richer set of information, and you can bill earlier if you meet criteria. So that's an advantage for sure.
So timeline. What our next steps are, immediately filling those 2 vacancies that we currently have in our department for the mental health skills worker and mental health crisis response worker. Hope to be training and onboarding the staff as soon as next month. We will be developing a job description for the behavioral health team and clinical supervisor to go to the personnel committee in May, with the potential to post for that position as soon as June. Realistically, would not anticipate having someone on board in that position, given the length of time it's taking for us to fill positions, especially one at this level, until the end of this year. A major factor in planning for adding 1 more person is our physical space. We do not have an office for this person, but we've started to have some idea generation around what we could do. Options with shared office spaces or reconfiguring our conference room space is really what we're left with at this point with our floor plan. So I know I moved really quickly through that information, and
No, we had to.
Brady's got it down the road. So any questions?
Well, it's just really helpful to see it laid out and to get us thinking about this, because it is a long journey that we have ahead of us. But I appreciate all the time and effort you put forth to provide the information and organize it in a way that it really helps us to think deeply about this.
When Allison, we've talked about this a number of times, and when she first presented the matrix, it's just overwhelming. There's just too many colors, too much words. I mean, there's a lot there. It's very complex and really hard to digest. And I think the first time it didn't have that first column, so I didn't see the stark contrast either. And so then when the first column was out, I was just like, oh, well, that's much clearer. Just if I didn't read, just looking at colors, and then going into those details too, with the notes and the descriptions was really helpful to me. And it's been discussed at the, I think Raina reported on it today at the local mental health advisory council. One of the things I also want to point out is just that I mean, clearly we can see the loss of services when HDC pulled out, as well as Ascend. What we don't often see is the impact on people when those services are lost, because there's a transition there, and either they straight up don't have the service, or they have to find it either by going to Duluth or virtually establishing a relationship, and that's not always possible or realistic, and just that kind of unstable service really just digs our hole deeper, and so when I see instability, I see it as the county organization's responsibility to help bring stability. That's what I feel is a social responsibility, is a public responsibility, but we also have to be responsible fiscally and making sure this can make sense, and just how that all works. And I believe that in that balance that it does make fiscal sense as well. And it's one of those things we have to provide. And I know when HTC pulled out first, and your response was, your initial response was to kind of do this full-fledged, expansion. And then, talking with supervisors, we thought, well, let's step back and see if we can kind of work this into our current staff levels. And I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate recognizing that that's just not sustainable or working with current staff levels, and we have a lot of needs that we need to progress. So I just appreciate the trials, the thought, the real intentionality there. And I think at the previous Public Health and Human Services Board meeting, I asked for spitball ideas too, and I don't see any of those, and that's okay. But I feel like you've approached this very well, and I'm a fan, long and short.
I just think too, when you talk about how does it affect the families and community members, it is significant if a person can't get the treatment that they need here, the services that they need here, they will leave. There are people whose children maybe have a unique one type of position. We've got like a one of everything here, right? And if that person needs to travel to Duluth or Minneapolis repeatedly for services, they may say, this isn't really functional for our family, so they leave. And then it creates this churning of employees. And so stabilizing mental health stabilizes our community so that adults with mental health needs can live here and be members of the community, have jobs. I think that's another thing. A lot of people have mental health diagnoses that receive mental health case management who work full-time. Taxpayers, they own homes, they own businesses, that we got some stereotypes around mental illness. And then also parents whose children are struggling in this work by driving to Duluth and back for treatment services because of the intensity that the child might need. Because they didn't get the right level of care at the right time, then the need got bigger, so then they have to be out of town. It causes strain on the rest of the team where that individual works. So there are really direct repercussions, just like the physical health needs when they are not met locally and you have to be gone. It just causes a lot of churn in the community.
Instability.
Instability, correct.
So according to Dave, the color chart that's up there is nice. Mine's black and white.
Oh.
So I'm wondering, can I get a copy, or maybe all of us have a copy, more than what we have in our packet? And could you give a little blurb so that the public understands the impact of HDC closing? Maybe a little bit more on that, because this is coming to the board eventually, isn't it? Okay. So I think we, as a board, maybe I'm the only one, that would like to have an understanding of HTC, the impact it had on the community, and now we are left with nothing, and we're trying to do something. So before you come before the board, could we have something like that, including this?
Absolutely, I can send out the full PowerPoint presentation and the, if you like, a printed copy.
Yeah.
And what that color, what this matrix shows is just that, what HTC provided, and then what we got now, and what we're trying to get, and then what's another step of trying to get, and then the proposal. And so, but different formats are probably really helpful. Just, this is really helpful for me, but some people might appreciate a paragraph or a list of HTC services that were provided and no longer, and all that kind of stuff. So different formats are helpful.
And how soon do you think you would need to have this before the board?
We'll go through all of the steps with personnel committee and job evaluation. Optimistic would be as soon as June. We would have a request along with the budgeting.
Okay.
I think we need to move on to Brady, and because we've already cut him short on his time, and he has to go in 22 minutes.
I just want to say very briefly, I like this matrix a lot, and I think it does a great job. I really appreciate your kind of links to all the programs that I described.
Yeah.
It's
It
super
may,
helpful.
but I can't read any of it.
Yeah.
So it's actually useless to me.
Right, well, that's why, if you go into the agenda packet, you can click on those links. Really, really great information, and I think this demonstrates how much thought you've put into this, and I think it's a really thorough assessment of what our needs are and what the benefits are of this new organization. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Happy to take any follow-up questions via email, and we'll be back with a presentation on mental health at the PHHS board in May.
All right.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. All right. Brady, we're going to move on to give you an opportunity to talk about development agreements.
About Tim Wilson.
You take whatever time you have, and
You move right on.
I
I
thought-
talked to him, I'm going to message him here.
I was just hoping we'd do that when he was here waiting. That's all. He expects that. So, we've been working through this, the economic development abatements for almost a year now, starting with the policy. The abatement policy we did last June, and then so on. And now we're getting to the development agreement phase. We got word yesterday that one of the two applicants is likely to get chosen. It won't be final until their board meeting on Thursday, so I'll say it out loud. So it seems pretty likely.
Only one?
One out of two. One out of two. There's a list all across the state. And one of them is on the list. I don't know if it's public or non-public at this point, but
How do we find out?
Public now?
you can go to MH. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess it's public. If you go to MHFA, go to their website. I can walk you through it. Well, you got to go to. I forget.
One of those you gotta dig for.
Just something, and I don't know, you have to go through like 6 different things. You can see it. But I guess the first thing I'd say is we're not under a specific deadline that I understood we were. When I said they're going to make this announcement, and then we've got about a month and a half. Well, they actually have their agreement, I guess we knew this, with EDA, that's the grant or deferred loan, whatever how they're describing it. That's what they have to finalize in the next month or so, because EDA actually made the application with them. But then our deadline is not a hard deadline, but they need to start construction. They recommend starting construction on their projects as soon as possible. So I guess that's the deadline. They said it's
When the
not-
frost goes out of the ground.
After the frost goes out, it's just not good in their history for projects like this. Let's say wait to the end of the summer, and things like that. Well, this year costs are going to go up. They've already gone up a lot, as the applicants will tell you. So it's already changing their cost structures, but you don't want it to go up anymore. So today really is just to look at what is going to be in those abatement agreements. I sent you this is actually Sherburne County's policy, and I changed Sherburne County to Cook County and things like that, and made blanks where some of the things were. It's not that this is the one we're going to end up with either. I would like to, it says in there that I will create a development agreement, but I'd really like your, maybe we've already talked about this, your authority to send whatever we come up with on to Bob Tofty at Freiberger to put it all together. I think we'd all be more confident if we did that. And one thing in the agreement that I gave you, I've looked at, you know, a few of them. This one doesn't have anything about like our costs, so we would take at least this section from another one. If we use Bob Tofty, he hasn't charged us for anything so far, just talking. But if he's doing the agreement, he'll have charges. There are things we're going to ask Ellers to do. I assume they will have charges. And so that'll say the applicant will pay those charges. That's normal. So it's just, it wasn't in this example I gave you. So it wasn't another one, we got to put it in there. Another, what I put in here, the whole section in red on the covenants, workforce covenants.
Right.
Well, that came from the EDA. That came from our previous Lutzen housing program, and I just dropped that in here just for
That's what it looked like to me.
information.
I remember.
Yeah, because that was a lot of the discussion. We didn't have any decisions or anything, but you guys sat here and talked about things like that.
Yep.
What's going to be in that? Who is going to rent those units? Is there any control over that? What do we want to see? So that's, at least you can see what the EDA did with that one. And one question that came up, I finally got to talk to MHFA, and they just, I don't know where they got that idea, but, because I didn't mention it, but they talked about things like, she had just quickly mentioned who could, like, if we were going to designate that, like, county employees or hospital, or that there were rooms reserved for them, they said to be really careful because you can't discriminate on the fair housing.
Yeah,
There's
that's
a
exactly
there's a
right.
federal law on that, and you know I don't have real detail. I sent her these covenants, and I says, "How about these? Do these fit?" So they have a policy at MHFA. It's based on the federal law and the state law, and it's kind of generic. It uses words like discriminate in terms of conditions or privileges and things like that. But I don't see anything here that, I mean, I usually think of discrimination is based on race or gender or, you know, the normal discrimination. I don't know if saying that we want full-time, year-round workers in any particular number or all of them, or if that's constitutes discrimination, so we'll have to find that out. I don't know the answer to that.
I have a question that and cost of those apartments. So one of the paragraphs here says the owner or the agent will advertise workforce housing, but it doesn't mention any income or any cap on the rentals. Now, if you have $4,000 small 2-bedroom apartment and say, I've advertised it, I didn't get anybody. Well, okay, now you get to use that for your business. Well, that would be a concern that we don't have some sort of guidelines in there.
And I believe that's
Or
kind of based,
expectations are.
MHFA actually has some language around that. I
I
think
think-
it's based on that 30% of your income, the average income of your county.
So that's what, I just didn't read that in this agreement, so I just want to make sure we incorporate
And that's
something like that.
that's probably because I couldn't find an agreement like this around housing. These are actually other kinds of, you know, construction, different kinds of businesses. I put this into this other example. There wasn't a housing example.
Right.
So maybe if I could find a county with a housing example, we'd have some of that language. So-
Actually, there's cities out there, I read theirs.
Yeah.
It's not a county, but there were quite a few cities that have these agreements, jobs
Yeah.
and housing, and they put a percent of units at a certain AMI percent.
Yeah.
Or say market rate, there's language out there, but
They do, letter F has the 25% is the max that can be used for, you know, if they don't succeed. So that's a little safeguard, but I like what you're
But
saying.
yeah, I
Mhm.
just want to make sure.
I also had a question just about what full time is defined as. I think our culture will be revisiting that in the not too distant future. Is that 32 hours, 30 hours, 40 hours? That's something that we should probably clearly define. And then it's a little redundant and possibly a copyright issue to say Airbnb or vacation rental by owner. I think short-term rentals, that's all you need right there.
So in one of the resolutions, 2021, we're talking about the Sawville Village. How about the other in Mr. Dieter's? Is this only applying to Sawville, or is it for both?
Only one of them is, looks like is getting the grant.
Oh, okay. So if it was Mr. Dieter's, we would just substitute his.
Right.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering why it was excluded.
And, well, he is Sawville Village. That's the name of his. Might be a clue. Okay.
I just read that, Red 5 LLC company has requested.
Yeah, I just picked one and said, just to make an example.
You think we'll know by next Tuesday who got it?
Well, no,
Well, no,
well,
Thursday.
Oh, Thursday.
Thursday, their board is, I don't know if they choose them or just confirm them. It may be decided and they just confirm it. So that's what I suspect.
The information about the recommended projects is on page 67 of the board packet, if anybody wants to look at that.
Is that ready to go out?
It is, well, it's on the
MHFA.
MHFA.
Oh, yeah, that's, okay. I can wait.
Okay.
67.
Should I wait, do that during text?
Yeah.
Do you want more input of what I would like to see included, or do you want me to keep going there?
That's why we're here.
That's
No,
why we're talking.
I'm making notes.
Okay, so, and it could be in here, and I just, I have a hard time with this kind of language. But, that if there's any damage or destruction to the property, that the developer is required to bring it back to what we are giving an abatement for. There's lots of languages I read out there, different ways to phrase that, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what really works.
So,
But if there's a fire or a tree falls down on a section of that building, that they just say, well, we're not going to repair that, or too bad, we'll leave that empty. No, we're expecting you to have the insurance and keep it up to good condition. And that could be in there, and it just was worded differently than what
yeah.
another one did, that I knew what they were talking about, so that was one.
I think a lot of that is already included in the one roof.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's because of MHFA.
Yeah, so I think the agreement's going to have to, that's where Bob Toth, I think, comes in. They're going to look at what MHFA is requiring of EDA, plus all the agreements we signed. Everything's going to have to coincide.
And then I like what you said about the administrative costs. Yeah, I want to make sure we're not on the hook for those costs that we will be incurring. And then some of them also had like a penalty because they're supposed to report once a year. And if they don't, there's anywhere from $100 to $1,000 penalty. And I don't think that's a bad line to put in there. Somebody is dragging their feet on reporting who they're renting to.
I think it's in there, but make a note of that. Anyway.
section 3.5 says change in use of project, which I understood, but one of the other ones that I read had a change in construction plans. If there's a change in construction plans, we get to be notified to it. And I'm thinking, everything changes in construction, in the middle of a construction project, and all of a sudden, oh, you know what, we really can't do 8 units. We can only do 6 because of this problem. Well, we may still approve this, but we get to be notified of that change. Is the way, I'm not a lawyer, but that's the way I read it when I read it in another, I'm like, oh, well, that's not so bad.
Yeah. No, we see that constantly. I think
Yeah.
it's,
And maybe the language just speaks to if the change involves a change in the number of units.
Yeah.
Is the main concern. Because
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
these like change orders. on-
Right.
right, not every
Right.
change order, yeah.
And I think clearly Molly can give a good review of this and help us with those types of things.
What about copy of it, to see, or Molly too?
Well, I think Molly too.
I think as much as she wants to be involved, I think we want to likely want to use Toffee though. I think she would want to.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm not even sure if we'll use this as a format. If we can find one that has a lot of housing language, we'll use that. This one had, I just noted a couple of, the responsibility for costs, and this one says that there are no other state or local government agencies providing financial assistance. Well, obviously, this one will get that. Any discussion on the covenants themselves, besides the definition of full-time? That letter F kind of gets to the letters B and F. The workforce housing units must be occupied by the qualified member on a permanent year-round basis. And then F, if no qualified member comes forward, you can rent it for seasonal workers. Density not to exceed 2 persons per bedroom, not to exceed 25% of workforce units. You might suggest other percentages, so not necessarily today, but think about it. And it looks like we have time to work on this for a couple of meetings.
Yeah.
So we're not under a specific timeline.
Well, this is a really good start, and we'll see what information we get on Thursday and go from there.
Yeah. Well, have you all gone to MHFA's site?
Not yet.
You know, okay.
I'm trying to be
Okay.
respectful and not patronize at once.
Wait, that, sorry, Brady.
I'm not respectful of me, because I do that constantly, so.
Sorry, everybody else.
Let me read it.
Oh, I already closed it.
Yeah.
It's old news now.
Well, any other
Okay.
questions or comments for Brady?
Okay.
Well, thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate all your
Yeah.
effort on
It's supposed
that.
to
We'll
be
revisit
online.
it soon.
I'm so paper-based. All this
Don't
stuff
forget
around
those
it,
papers.
Everywhere I go.
All right.
I don't
Thank
think
you.
it's really a secret.
That's what I said.
Okay,
All
thank
right,
you.
thank you so much.
Time for a break?
We'll take a quick break,
Tim's here.
because Tim's here.
Madam Chair and Board, I'm willing to throw this out here for an option because I do plan to bring this as action item for the board next week. And so you guys can have the option as to whether you want to see this now or push it off to my item next week, and then you'll get the whole package all at once.
I've already seen it, so
Oh, we privileged thing, you know.
And I
One
can hand
time.
you out
Come
a
on,
few-
give it to me.
a few of the hard copy of things that I was going to hand out today anyway in preparation for next week. But next week is where we'll be talking about it more to do the action items of setting up.
Let's wait till we have all our commissioners here and can talk about that. And why don't you come on up and have a seat and we'll discuss.
April, how's the agenda looking for next week? I haven't taken a peek yet. Because I know I'm going to be putting several things on it.
Brock, all you do is buy lunch.
Nice try.
Be prepared.
Nice try.
Try it. When do you get us pizza?
You give me a raise. We'll talk
Thanks for
about
the offer, Tim. Like all the people reporting back to 2015.
Yeah.
I need to review all that too, because you did a great job with it.
And
Thank you.
So it looks like Brady has several things on for next week, including the redistricting.
I have a feeling the agenda may be a little stacked.
Yeah.
Well, then we'll be here.
Then we'll
Back
be
lunch.
here. We're fine.
Bring your sleeping
Because
bag.
I'm ready to
We're
eat.
good.
Sure, right now.
No, there's a cooking free right there if you need it.
There's what? Well, I don't, am I going to need it?
I don't know, that's what I'm saying, if you need it.
I don't know.
There are other people in the world that aren't even getting one meal today, so.
Please.
Wow,
That
is true.
Boy, did I hear that a lot when I was growing up.
Well, then
Eat
it was
those peas.
Africa. Then it was Africa. The kids in Africa are starving.
Yes.
And they still are, so what are you gonna do?
We were all thinking it.
Thank goodness my older brother was the first one to say, well, then send it to them.
Yeah, I'll give them my peas,
I
that's
always,
for
yeah, I always
sure.
had to watch what happened to him and then say, I'm good, Mom.
The movie Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah.
And the line
Yeah.
in there is there's someone in America starving.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah.
All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. We're here to continue our meeting, it looks like, to talk about vacation rental licensing program and kind of the status. And Tim Nelson is here to share with us. So thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Good afternoon. I usually used to saying good morning, and now I can say good afternoon. We'll run through this real quick. As I indicated a little bit earlier, I will be bringing this as an action item before the board next Tuesday to kind of start off the review process. As I had kind of discussed in previous meetings, and as you know, this year is the year of our full review of the program. We had kicked it off, but I can just run through quickly the PowerPoint that I set up. There's a little bit of some background.
Then there's that.
Okay, let me try this one. There we go. All right. So this has really been a long-standing discussion, and we We formed the first formal committee, and I have to say formal committee, back in 2015 because we had been talking about this for a lot longer than back to 2015. 2015 is when we did the first formal committee process, and okay, there we go. So we ended up adopting it in the ordinance in 2019. So there's quite a few years we had discussions there, and as I handed out to you today, and these will be included in the packet for next Tuesday as well, you'll see we occasionally we met as the committee, and we had submitted even the report. The full one that you have is from February of 2018. And in that report, we had actually recommended that no further action be done in terms of administering or oversight to vacation rentals. They have always been, since the adoption of our ordinance in 1984, they have always been just regarded as a permitted use in all residential zone districts, which means that they were able to be used in that fashion without having to come to land services or planning and zoning for any additional permits. So that was all the case up the way through February of 2018. Between 2018 and 2019, we met a few more times, and that committee, and we'll discuss membership later, but that committee had other issues have been thrown into the pot, more concerns were generated, so we did meet some more times, and by the end of 2018, the determination if you see the other paper that I handed out was the subcommittee report. They came out, went to the full committee, and then was brought to the Board of Commissioners to go ahead and actually adopt a licensing program. We retained host compliance in November of 2019. The ordinance became effective in January 1 of 2020, and the online licensing went live through our website portal in February of 2020. We did send out the survey, and if you look at it, most of the counties in Minnesota do not regulate vacation rentals. Kind of basically, they're not necessarily destination counties and such, so this is all the counties that had responded, and most counties just do not regulate them altogether. In 2018, we were in that category of generally permitted. As you see down in that orange bar below, most of the counties that do regulate vacation rentals regulate them through the interim use or conditional use permit process, and one of the reasons why they're able to do that is because they have much fewer numbers in vacation rentals than we do. They have maybe a couple dozen, or whatever, so it's easier for them to run through. If we were to run through the number of vacation rentals that we would have through an interim or conditional use process, logistically, we just would not be able to have the bandwidth to do that. So right now, after the adoption of our program, we're on that little blue line. We are a county level license program, and we do an annual license through there. Why did we decide to regulate vacation rentals? When it first came up, a lot of it was really based on the possible conflicting uses between vacation rentals and residential areas, because we're talking just houses like on Crawfordville Road or the Cascade Beach Road, the more intensive uses of vacation rentals amongst residential areas. And so there was that issue of trespass, noise, light, all of those things that was kind of the overriding factor as to why we were discussing that to begin with. Add in the mom and pop, especially with the resorts, the smaller resorts, getting a level playing field and making sure that everybody was paying the right lodging taxes and sales taxes to the county. That was a big factor at that point. And then that is when it really started getting into the tax classification discussions as well, as to whether are they commercial, are they residential, what is that classification. So that discussion really came into play at that point. So when we adopted it actually only for an initial 3-year period. We wanted to make sure that we had a good a good set number of what are we actually even dealing with, because we hadn't been regulating them, so we really only anecdotally knew what kind of the issues were out there. We were hearing them just from word of mouth and such, and not really having an official way of tracking all of that. But we decided, well, we'll only do it for a 3-year period, so that'll force us to do this review of everything and determine again whether we do want to do something, and if we do it, continue with the same type of program we have, or tweak it, modify it, or change it however we need to. The definition of vacation rental is an interesting thing. Commissioner Mills had mentioned earlier, short-term rental is a VRBO, or is it vacation rental, short-term rental, STRs, or short-term rental is a big acronym that's out there. The state of Minnesota has their own definition, but they don't have an actual vacation rental license. They have a lodging license. It's run through their program, and it's run through their lodging program. So we took a look at how do we define vacation rentals, and we're pretty unique around the state, from around the state, in terms of what kind of lodging situations we have. They're an owner owned and or managed by resorts, or managed by management companies that are out there. So we have a lot of unique circumstances as to what is a vacation rental or short-term rental and what isn't. As I indicated, the Minnesota Department of Health doesn't really have a specific definition, although they have been working with the same issue because a lot of other counties are struggling with this, and they do it through their lodging program. So with us, we decided to kind of par it into three real basic components here. We wanted to have less than a 30-day time period. And then we wanted not as a bed and breakfast. We list bed and breakfasts specifically as either permitted or conditional uses in zone districts. And so we do have interim uses and conditional use permits that are out there for specifically bed and breakfasts. And then we also exclude, similar to the described places, which are managed by and regulated as a part of a hotel or resort. So you get into Caribou Highlands or other places. Bluefin Bay is a good example too. You have owners that they own, but they are managed through the resort itself. You go to the front desk. So as far as the user is concerned, there is no real difference in the type of use. And one major component too is that if an operation is a part of a resort, there's that level of more intensive use. So it's not really conflicting with the general area because it's already in a resort commercial zone district, which has an anticipated higher level of use to it with regards to traffic, noise, and everything else, not necessarily in the residential areas. So we wanted to make sure we had those three, which kind of narrows down what and how many we're actually working with. Because if you look at how many are in there, when we first started looking at this, and the initial estimate was 634, but that included everything that was owned individually within resorts. That actually also included 2 inside the city limits of Grand Marais, which we don't have jurisdiction in. So we saw that number, and that's what kind of made us want to pare down that definition so that we made it a manageable number to be able to work with. Our definition when we sent out a request for proposals was approximately 270. And the first report that came in from host compliance tallied 377, which again had taken some time to since then narrow down exactly what by definition is or isn't the vacation rental. So that's been a bit of a moving target, so to speak, especially during the COVID time here. The end of the report in 2021 tallied 239, and between 239 250 in that area is what we really approximate as being an accurate number for it as it relates to the definition that we have for it and what we manage. As I indicated, during COVID, we've had a number of operations that had fell off. They had been doing vacation rentals since the beginning, but then decided no, with the requirements of a new license and the uncertainty of COVID, they weren't going to do it anymore. And then other people saw it as an opportunity to say, well, okay, it's COVID, people aren't flying to Europe or going on other vacations, maybe they'll drive up. And so we've had new people start as a result of COVID. So as I indicated, it's been a bit of a moving target for us. So compliance levels, within 2021, we had 239 rentals licensed. Currently in 2022, we had 273 letters that were sent out, and 246 have been compliant in that, and then 27 properties we still need further follow-up on. And we've been working really closely with Bob Thompson, the county assessor, to really narrow down what actually is a vacation rental, and then again how it implicates their tax classification, but more so for our intents and purposes is making sure that they get their license and are able to meet the criteria that we have for that license. So from a financial basis, we had initially, if you read the report, the committee had recommended a fee of $100, and in looking at the RFP that we had sent out and the proposals that we had coming back, Host Compliance at the time, and now they've changed their name to Granicus, in terms of helping us service the portal through the internet and such. We decided to actually jack that to $200 as an annual fee. And what that does is, in 2021, that gave us $44,800 in fees, and our host compliance monitoring costs were $24,000. And fortunately, this is one of the few programs within our department, because we're heavily reliant on general revenue funds. Our permit fees are very, very low. We have a real bad economies of scale in terms of the number of permits we work with. But with this licensing program, we actually are able to it pays for itself. So we do get sufficient amount to be able to cover the cost of the vendor, the website monitoring, and the staff to be able to take their time to follow up on all of the issues that have come up over the course of this time. So that's one area in which we're doing fairly well at. The balance of it covers the admin costs that are associated with the program. So the issues experienced throughout this time is the efforts in getting the large vendor to customize. We use, as I said, Host Compliance or Granicus. They're worldwide, and they are good in terms of listening to us and kind of understanding what our needs are, but they're catering to Vail, Colorado, they're catering to Paris and all these different places. So for them to be able to customize the type of services that we're getting from them has been challenging, but if we stay on it and we carry our conversations and communications with them, they have been pretty good in coming around, ultimately in meeting the needs of what we require of them. We have this 24/7 hotline, and it's we have a cafeteria plan, so we got to choose several different items into the costs of this. And this is one of the areas which probably at some point we can probably dismiss. We are paying for the service. This is the lowest cost of the cafeteria plan, but it is a 24/7, and what we do get is if people call in for complaints or this or that, they either should be routed to law enforcement, because if it's late at night and it's a noise, trespass, that kind of thing where law enforcement's engaged, that's forwarded to law enforcement. But most of the calls that we get are generally inquiries on how to get a vacation rental license or how people can convert their homes to vacation rentals. So we can actually utilize our own regular phone lines for that one. So we'll probably come back with a recommendation to eliminate that part of the service. One of the issues has been a delineation of who performs the license renewals, and this goes into the nuances with those units that are part of a resort, say Caribou Highlands or Bluefin Bay or some of the other ones where they're individually owned, and then they can either manage through the company themselves, and then everything's taken care of at the front desk, or they can retain a management company like Cascade Vacation Rentals, and then they would manage it for them, or some choose to manage it themselves, which has created a lot of confusion for individuals using those inside the resort. They assume that because it's in the resort that they get to go to the resort at the front desk, when indeed sometimes the resort it's not their business, it belongs to an individual party. So part of that has filtered into who actually does the license renewals. So we have this compiled list, and we have to change it. We've had to change it on each year because sometimes the management company chooses to, at first they choose, well, we'll go ahead and make sure everybody's licensed. And then the next year we're putting a lot of time and energy into that, so we're going to put it on the owners themselves to do it. So then we have to contact each of the owners themselves to do it. So getting those logistics in has been one of those issues that has cropped up, and we're trying to streamline that and get that a lot more efficient as well. The distinction in the self-managed units and resorts, this is kind of that carryover of the same one, but in that line, it really impacts more kind of the flow of the management, which really is more between the property owners themselves, or the unit owners, and the resorts that they're in, and not as much our issue. That's kind of a business model issue that they have themselves, the resorts, between the resorts, the property owners, and it just leaves the person who is utilizing that as a vacation rental a little bit confused at the time. So that's something that kind of needs to be addressed from a business model standpoint. And then the lodging tax collection versus the sales tax. There had been a lot of confusion that VRBO in particular as a website was collecting the taxes, but they're only collecting sales taxes. They're not collecting lodging taxes. And, we want to be able to work with the assessor's office. There's components in with host compliance, but there is also with RT Vision, which is the application we use for our e-permitting software that would enable the assessor's office to more easily collect the lodging tax portion of that in relation to the kind of the system that is in place right now, which again is nuanced based off of the location of where the unit is. There's different rates for the different areas that they're located in, and that can be improved upon and made more efficient. So kind of the community issues that we're experiencing a lot more discussion in terms of the impact with the workforce housing, the housing market in general, the rising values. And then realtors are actually pushing too as well, and they don't have to push hard because it's kind of a general knowledge out there. We're promoting sales by promoting short-term rentals with those, which are in a point taking some off of the some of those properties off the just regular housing market and long-term rental markets. And I know Commissioner Swalson was part of the North Shore Management Board. We've been having continuing discussions with them all along the shore in terms of how the short-term rentals are impacting the housing market. Some of the jurisdictions are putting moratoriums on theirs.
Right. I told you the two harbors had done it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Stay related during our last meeting that now the county is considering putting a moratorium on. It's still unclear to me. I need to have a further discussion with Commissioner Stay under what premise or what allows them, to actually put a moratorium on individuals being able to turn their properties into a short-term rental. That's not clear to me. It may very well be there, and they're a pretty savvy group down there. I'm sure there are county attorneys looking at those things too. But, yeah, it's just interesting to me, and we're trying to keep up with what's happening here in our local area on this same topic.
And we have, I actually, Neva just mentioned to me as I was coming in here that she had been alerted that Lake County has now put out public notice for putting a moratorium on. And actually, from a legal from a legal standpoint, a moratorium is the term, but the technical legal concept is called an interim ordinance. And so it is through, we've done it.
So they do it through the ordinance process.
Yeah.
That's helpful to me.
Yeah, we've done it. We've done it in the past with cell towers predominantly. We've talked about it in terms of sled dog kennel operations, but we haven't put a moratorium on. But we did do it with the with the cell towers, and the intent of an interim ordinance or a moratorium, it gives you a 12-month period of time. You can extend that out, but the intent of it is for you, if you're going to put a moratorium on, that you take that time to then work on either modifying or changing or doing an ordinance. So what it is just taking a pause. It can't be a permanent moratorium. It is just putting in a pause. So yeah, Lake County has just put that in. I haven't seen the notice for it, so it will be interesting to see what it does say. Moving forward with the program, and this is one of the sheets that I had given you, and this is what I intend to come back next week with, and I even wrote a bit of a timeline on that sheet. So on the 26th, I want to come to you with a proposal for a vacation rental review steering committee, just a smaller committee to kind of, as we did with the Passion Beach or Old Shore Beach kind of committee, is a smaller committee to determine and recommend back to the board a full committee, a timeline, the scope of the review, and all of this. So on next week, I want to come back to you with that to start a steering committee and recommend membership for that. Want to be able to come back then on May 24th to report back from the steering committee to the board for what the full committee membership would be, scope of review, public engagement process. Obviously, there's been a lot of interest expressed in the public with regards to vacation rentals. There's a lot of interest with the vacation rental management companies, with the resorts. I mean, there's a lot of interest across the board in this discussion. So we definitely have to have a pretty vigorous public engagement process. And then a length of review timeline. We're going to need some time if we're going to amend or change our ordinance and our agreements with host compliance or Granicus. So I want to come back on May 24th for that recommendation. And then initially, I'm looking at trying to come back by August 23rd with that full committee recommendation back to the board, which will give us a few months then to work on modifying any agreements or ordinance changes that we make, and have those in place by the end of September moving forward, which is kind of our timeline that we did when we first adopted this, which could give us then the start date of all the changes to be January 1st of 2023. And I think, there it is. Any questions?
Now, the one thing I did, and if you said it, Tim, I missed it, so I just, if I'm repeating, I apologize. But in that leveling the playing field with this ordinance and what was going on, the piece that really stuck out to me was the piece that our requirement through our ordinance that if you're running a short-term rental, you meet all the requirements and have to demonstrate that you worked through to get the permit from the Minnesota Department of Health. Because there were too many of these that were being done that basically it was just people that, as you said, came up, maybe bought a place here because they figured, well, we can afford it because we're going to be renting it out to help pay for it and this type of thing, but weren't thinking through all of those issues that, you know, a rental requires from a Department of Health perspective and how it's maintained and how it's, you know, all the things that go into that. Of course, they can, you know, some people think they can do that by just hiring another, you know, company here locally to manage that for them. Well, that doesn't relieve them of having that Minnesota Department of Health, right? So we've kind of sorted that out to make sure that the owners have, you know, have met these requirements. And it gets a little bit sticky when he says, our biggest discussions are those that are owners of properties that are part of resorts, but they decide to take them and deal with it independently, right? Because once they decide to do it independently, before they enjoyed the licensing and the permitting from the resort, and we recognize that as well, right? So we don't try to do anything with them. But once you decide to take it on your own, then talking with the resort owners, they of course demand that they can't take, we can't control that, what they do there anymore, so we don't want to be held liable for it. So you see what I mean? It's really interesting from that perspective to kind of take that different view of what's happening in some instances in that, as you're going through these. But I agree, it does help to, from those folks running the different camps, resorts, and these types of things. This ordinance, I think, really goes a long way in trying to level that playing field anyway, so everybody, and most importantly to me, is that it protects the guests that come to stay in these places by ensuring that the proper, management and the proper permitting through the Department of Health has been looked at and is done on an annual basis.
Well, and you bring up a good point, Commissioner Swallowson. And the first point being that I did speak fairly quickly in trying to respect everybody's time here in this. So if I did miss anything, that's why I have the question slides put on up there. But also wanted to note that we do have, and a part of the ordinance was the development of an appeals panel, vacation rental appeals panel, which Commissioner Swallowson is part of, as well as Bob Thompson, the assessor, myself, and then we usually include Joseph Ruth, who is our staff member, who is the on-the-ground administering the program. And we use that as a sounding board to hit some of these kind of odd topics that are in there. And it is a really good point with regards to the Department of Health, because there are some circumstances that the Department of Health kind of raises their eyebrow at that we have here, which is, even getting drinking water from the lake as opposed to a well. We have plenty of people that do get their water supply from the lake or hand carrying it, which the Department of Health maybe scratches their head and say, how do we work with this? Yurts, another thing, how do we work with this? And so we've worked a lot hand in hand with the Department of Health to try to narrow that band of issues that might be distinct between us in that sense. So, yeah.
I wish I remember which county it was now. It was in a recent meeting where they're like, oh, and the vacation rentals are going bananas. And do you realize what strain that puts on MDH or something like that? And I hadn't really thought about that aspect. And somehow that related to their county operations. I was just kind of confused about the whole, I felt like I missed something, but yes, other counties do it differently. And, somebody in the region, I believe. So that's not very well.
Well, and they have had some turnover in the Department of Health with regards to this program. And we have, Sarah Bentz is one that has been involved from the very beginning, so she's pretty well versed in it. But there have been people that have come and gone, and in determining how they handle, do they handle the county, even this particular county, geographically administering it themselves with the permits, because we do have a larger amount of permits compared to Lake County or other counties in the area. So we're kind of a big player in that sense. Our population's low, but the numbers of vacation rentals are quite high.
Doesn't seem like they changed a whole lot from what we can tell from our report.
And they come and they go, and it's just, where does that balance? We've only been doing it 3 years, and of these last 3 years may not be the best years to get that example from, just because of how uncertain everything's been. But at least we're getting a more clear picture as we go, and hopefully if things kind of still playing out a little bit, we'll get even better and better numbers as we move forward.
And I would say the majority of the VRBOs are in the West End, and probably quite a few in town, but we're concerned about the county. So I'd be glad to share with you, though.
Well, and it did make me wonder, because in the city, the license, this does not apply.
Nope.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, have we had discussions if maybe the city should be, or offer in? I did think they should be at one point. Didn't get very far, but maybe there is an opportunity to say, we should be treating all vacation rentals the same.
We just have no jurisdiction within the city,
So it has,
and that's the problem.
Has there been
Yeah,
reaching out to the city to say, hey, are you interested
Yeah.
this time around?
And actually, they were part of the committee process from the beginning. And they did participate in the meetings with us, and they kind of made their own determinations based off of the information. And there's certainly, it would be easier for us to have a consistency, certainly, between the county and the city with the regulations. We just can't force that. But yeah, we certainly are most welcome for the city to participate in the process, and we can reach out to them. As I indicated, they were involved on the initial process all the way through.
Well, as I look at your last slide, I think we have many questions. We could be here for days, but we certainly appreciate the timeline that you've given us to kind of frame all the work that needs to be done, and we'll look forward to visiting with you next Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, well, we have our Personnel Committee minutes and minutes from the Building Committee. And then, would anyone like to make a motion to?
We don't do that.
We just go, we just run away. Actually, we get ready to go to another meeting.
Yep, I'm